Hello everyone, welcome to the 75th take of recording this first video newsletter. Really honestly, I recorded this newsletter. I started recording this video newsletter like 70 times, stopped and recorded again. But yeah, welcome to the first video version of this newsletter. I'm recording this in my library/reading corner. I feel a bit nervous because I'm not used to speaking to a camera, and while you can see me, I unfortunately can't see you. In this first video version of the newsletter, I would like to tell you a little bit about my early morning routine, the thing that I introduced to my early morning routine that kind of changed my life. Since the pandemic began, it kind of changed our daily routines, particularly if we had to work from home, and I had to work from home for some time. Before I pick up my phone in the morning and check the endless emails and get drowned in noise of social media, I start my day with Leo Tolstoy's Calendar of Wisdom. For those of you who haven't heard about this book, Leo Tolstoy spent last 16 years of his life compiling different wisdoms from different philosophers and different world religions, and the result was this literally a calendar containing a wisdom for every day. I'll make a separate video about this book. The whole story of how Tolstoy created it and how he chose what to include and what not is really amazing. In this video, I would like to tell you about a metaphor that I found in this book that really changed my way of thinking. It's a story about Confucius inviting two of his students to his garden. Confucius wanted to find out which of his students is wiser. When those two students came to visit Confucius in his garden, they both saw an apple tree. The first student went and picked up the apple and started looking at it and thinking about it and analyzing the color, the smell, how it felt in his hand, while the second one just went and plucked the apple and started eating it. Confucius said that the second student is the wise one because he actually used the gifts that the garden has provided him. For Confucius, it was important to use the fruits of nature and use the knowledge that you have. For some reason, this metaphor reminded me of a quote by Stephen Fry. I would like to read that quote to you as Stephen Fry said it. "We are not nouns, we are verbs. I'm not a thing, an actor, a writer. I am a person who does things. I write, I act, and I never know what I'm going to do next. I think you can be imprisoned if you think of yourself as a noun." The reason why I decided to tell you this story and to quote Stephen Fry, they kind of pushed me to create this newsletter and then to create podcast, and now I'm sitting in front of the camera all nervous. As you can see, I sit in my library. I love reading, but often I ask myself, what's the purpose of all of this? What's the purpose of me reading everything from art to artificial intelligence if this knowledge is not applicable? I felt like that student, the very first student who just took an apple and never ate it and just looked at it and analyzed it but never used it. One of the actions that you can take is to share what you have right now. And I decided to share my journey of how I change. So that story that I read in Tolstoy's Calendar of Wisdom one morning led me to create this newsletter and this podcast, and now created this video version of my newsletter. There are books in my library that I started to appreciate even more after I finished reading Ross King's The Bookseller of Florence. It's a book about 15th century manuscript hunters from Florence who traveled across Europe to find ancient texts of philosophy and literature which were about to be perished because of the neglect and ignorance of its owners. There is a story of Poggio Bracciolini who traveled to St. Gall and found in a monastery there works by the philosopher Cicero, which were long considered to be perished. He was so surprised to see the priests of the monastery using these priceless philosophical texts that survived for 1,000 years as something to keep them warm, and they just threw it on fire. Poggio instantly asked them to buy those works of Cicero, the ones that were still intact and left there. Priests agreed, but when Poggio found another work that was also priceless, it was Quintilian's Instituto d'Oratorio, the work that was considered long lost. Priests realized that this manuscript hunter actually found a treasure. They didn't understand what the value of knowledge that work contained, but they realized the price. They didn't allow Poggio to buy it, but they allowed him to copy it. To give you an idea how long is Quintilian's work, it is 900 pages long today in the modern edition. And Poggio copied it by hand in 32 days and brought it to Florence, where Vespasiano, which this book is focusing on, Vespasiano is considered to be Michelangelo of bookselling. Vespasiano copied this work and spread it, and now we can appreciate and actually enjoy all the wisdoms that work tells. Today, when I pick up Cicero's works or works by Homer or Plato or Socrates, which I have in my library, I always appreciate people who preserved it for me, and I always get sad about those works that were destroyed because of ignorance, indifference, and sometimes just censorship, simple censorship. I believe that there are generally two forces in our world. The one that is set to destroy, and the other one that is set to create, but also to preserve. So I think this book is about people who try to preserve civilization and works of literature and philosophy. The second book that I would like to tell you about is by Matt Alt. He's an American who lives in Tokyo with his wife, and they both run a localization company where they translate products from English to Japanese. Matt Alt and his wife have several published books together. This book is the first book that Matt Alt wrote by himself. The book is called Pure Invention: How Japan's Pop Culture Conquered the World. Right on the first page of his book, Matt is quoting Oscar Wilde, who said, "In fact, the whole of Japan is pure invention. There is no such country, there are no such people. The Japanese people are, as I have said, simply a mode of style, an exquisite fancy of art." Matt Alt's book is a bit difficult to describe. He obviously, as the title suggests, tells about Japanese inventions such as video games, manga, karaoke, the first Walkman, but at the same time it's kind of an anthropological study of Japanese culture after the World War II. It's a must-read to all Japanophiles. It's wonderfully written and is also available in audio version on Audible. My interview with Matt Alt is coming very soon on my podcast. I'll share it with you via my newsletter. If you are not subscribed yet to my podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever you listen to, please do, because an interview with Matt Alt where he tells about his discovery of Japan is coming very soon. I decided to dedicate the third segment of this newsletter to books that I come back to very often. Not the ones that I've read just recently, but the ones that I come back to for advice and occasionally reread them. And one of them is Epictetus's Discourses. It's a wonderful book full of advice. Particularly one of the focuses of Epictetus is that he says that we cannot control the world outside us, but we can control our impressions and how we react to it. And once we master our reactions to the external world, we become invincible. Epictetus himself was a slave who had to teach himself how to react to injustices in his world, and later became free and became one of the most prominent Stoic philosophers. In this newsletter, I would like to read to you one of my favorite passages from Epictetus. It will be particularly interesting for the people who are perfectionists, although I believe all of us are in some sense perfectionists. Perfectionism to me is more has a more negative connotation than a positive connotation. Perfectionism more stops you from doing something rather than helps you to create something really perfect and ideal. So about that, Epictetus says, "Consider at what price you sell your integrity, but please, for God's sake, don't sell it cheap. Even if I lack the talent, I will not abandon the effort on that account." In short, we do not abandon any discipline for despair of ever being the best in it. It's a beautiful passage that emphasizes that perfectionism shouldn't stop you from doing what you would like to do. You should aim to the highest possible goal, and that's why Epictetus says that don't sell cheap your integrity. That means set your goals high. But at the same time, the fact that you are not going to become your idol, the Socrates, the highest ideal that you set out for yourself, doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it at all. Alright guys, thank you for watching. As you can see, I decided to go and grab a coffee after 70 takes of recording the video newsletter. So thank you all for who watched this, and I would really love your feedback. If you can send me an email or leave a comment, or any way you would like to contact me. There are lots of things that I plan to do with this podcast and with this idea and community. I cannot say entirely that I know what I'm doing, but I like the direction that I'm headed towards to, and only with your feedback I can improve. I'll see you next month with new book recommendations, new ideas. Thank you once again. I'll go and grab a coffee that spilled all over the place while I was walking. До свидания.